Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be talking about teleology and biology,
Ooh.
which is a really interesting concept. And I'm really happy to have you here to talk about it with me.
Yeah, definitely.
So when we talk about teleology, we're talking about the idea that things in nature, especially living things, have a purpose,
Right.
a goal.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a concept that's really familiar to us, right? Like, it's easy to say, oh, the heart is for pumping blood.
Right.
But when we start to think about it from a purely scientific perspective,
Yeah.
it can get a little
Slippery.
yeah.
Yeah.
Because in a world of cause and effect and
Physical laws,
right, where does this idea of purpose
Fit in. Yeah, exactly.
It's almost like we're hardwired to ask, what's it for?
Right.
Even when we know it might not be the right question to be asking.
Yeah. We're surrounded by this kind of language all the time, right? We see a gazelle stots to warn others, or
Right. Or a spider spins a web to catch prey. Even something like a tiny feather
right.
is for insulation or flight.
Exactly. And it's interesting because it's so useful.
Right.
Like, it helps us to understand these complex systems.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, then we get into these theological debates of like, okay, is it really for that? Or,
right. Is that just...
Well, we're thinking about it.
Yeah. Are we imposing that?
Yeah.
So you sent me this fantastic entry from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy.
Oh, yeah. It's a good one.
It's dense.
It is dense. It's a long one.
But it's a really great guide for this deep dive.
It is.
And one of the things that it lays out really nicely is all the headaches that teleology causes for a purely scientific view.
Yeah, because it brings up all these questions,
right.
like, is it snaking in vitalism?
Right.
Is it messing with cause and effect?
Right.
Can it even coexist with these mechanistic explanations that we have? Is it just mental gymnastics, like we were saying?
Right.
And then, maybe the biggest one, like, is it even testable?
Right.
Can we actually do science with this idea?
Exactly, yeah. So that's what we're going to be tackling in this deep dive.
We are.
But before we jump into all of the modern theories and debates and all that, I think it would be really helpful to kind of take a step back and look at the historical roots of this idea.
Definitely.
Because, like, Plato, Aristotle, those guys were all over this, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, they were wrestling with this stuff, but in very different ways. So, like, for Plato, it was all about this external idea, his forms. Everything in the world was an imperfect copy of this perfect blueprint.
Okay.
So, like, a bird's wings are for flying because that's their role in this grand cosmic design.
So it's like they're striving for this
perfect birdness.
Perfect birdness.
But can never quite reach it.
Right.
And then we have Aristotle, who is a little bit more grounded. I think he thought purpose was inherent in the thing itself.
Okay.
So an acorn is for becoming an oak tree.
Right.
It's not like aiming at some external ideal.
Okay.
It's fulfilling its own nature.
Gotcha. Yeah. So that's interesting. So you have these two very different perspectives. But how did this actually, like, impact science? Not just, like, philosophy in the abstract, but how did these ideas actually influence how people were doing science?
Well, Aristotle, his ideas actually had a huge impact on medicine.
Okay.
So you have Galen, a really famous physician, and he was all about understanding anatomy through function.
Okay.
So he'd say you can't understand a heart unless you know it's for pumping blood.
Okay.
Like, the function was central to how things worked, not just what they're made of.
It's not just a parts list.
Exactly.
But then didn't things start to shift a bit?
Yeah.
With William Harvey and all his work on blood circulation?
Yeah, he did.
Because he was all about observation and experiments.
Yeah, very much so.
Like, he was actually, like,
getting up there.
Getting in there and seeing how things worked.
Yeah.
Right.
This is where we start to see that shift towards mechanistic explanations.
Okay.
Right. We're moving away from just saying, oh, it's for this.
Right.
And we're starting to actually look at the nuts and bolts. But even Harvey, with all his focus on, the heart as this incredible pump, he didn't totally escape teleology. He still saw it as this beautifully complex machine designed to circulate blood.
So maybe it's not as black and white as we like to think, right?
Yeah.
Like, maybe purpose and mechanism
aren't mutually exclusive.
Aren't totally separate things, yeah. And then, of course, you can't talk about this stuff without bringing in Kant.
Our philosophical heavyweight.
Our philosophical heavyweight.
Right, yes.
And he came in and basically said that, like, humans just can't help but see things.
As purposeful?
As purposeful, yeah. Even if
that purpose is
all in our heads.
In our minds. Yeah, more in our minds than in nature itself.
Okay, so he's not saying...
It's not to say that,
that there is no purpose.
That there is no purpose. He's saying, like, we might be
imposing that.
Yeah, imposing it because it's how we make sense of a complex world.
Right.
We like things to be neat and orderly.
Yeah.
And so we project that onto nature.
Right.
Even though it might not actually be there.
Right. It's like our brains need a reason for why things are the way they are.
Yeah.
So even with Kant, we have this tension, right?
Absolutely.
Between our instinct to see purpose.
Yeah.
And the scientific need to explain it without resorting to like a conscious mind.
Yeah, like a
designing everything.
Yeah, exactly.
And I imagine this tension really comes to a head with Darwin.
Oh, absolutely.
And the theory of natural selection, right?
It changes
but now we have this mechanism for how things change over time.
Yeah.
So the question becomes, did Darwin kill off teleology?
Yeah.
Or did he give it a whole new foundation?
A whole new playing field.
Yeah. And that's what we'll be tackling next.
That's where it gets good.
So stay tuned.
Welcome back to our deep dive on teleology and biology.
Okay, so last time we were talking about how Darwin kind of shook things up.
He really did.
With the theory of natural selection, right?
Yeah.
And we were left with this question of like, okay, did he kill off this whole idea of purpose in nature?
Right.
Or did he give it like a whole new foundation to stand on?
A whole new way of thinking about it.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's what's so fascinating is like, even today.
Yeah.
There are still debates about how these two things fit together.
Right.
Teleology and natural selection.
Yeah.
So one approach, and this is kind of a starting point, I think, is to just acknowledge how useful teleological language is. Like, it really helps us make sense of this complexity.
Right. Like, we can't avoid talking about a part's purpose or...
Right. Like, it's just so intuitive to think in terms of function and purpose when we're talking about living things.
Yeah. So it's almost like we can use that language, but we have to be careful about
what we're actually implying.
Yeah, like, are we saying that there was some
intention behind it,
conscious intent that created that purpose,
or is
that just a shortcut?
A useful way of talking about it.
Yeah, a useful way of talking about it.
Yeah.
Okay, so where does that leave us then?
Well, one way to kind of square this circle is to focus on the organization of living things. Okay. Some scientists and philosophers are really emphasizing this idea that teleology arises from this incredible dance of parts.
Okay.
Everything's working together.
Yeah, like a system.
Yeah, like a system to maintain this stable, functioning whole.
Okay.
Like you think about a car engine.
Yeah.
The purpose of it emerges from how all the parts are arranged.
Right. It's not just like a random collection of parts.
There's not just a junk drawer.
Yeah. It's like it's organized. It's organized for a specific...
Yeah, to achieve something.
Yeah.
And living things are even more amazing.
Yeah.
Because they're not just organized, they're self-organizing.
Oh, right.
Which is a whole other level of mind-blowing.
Okay, explain that a little bit more.
Well, so this idea of autopoiesis.
Okay.
Have you heard of that?
I have, but I always struggle with it a little bit.
Yeah, it's a tricky one.
Yeah.
It basically means that living things are constantly creating and maintaining themselves.
Okay.
Like they have this built-in drive to persist.
Right, like they want
to stay alive, to adapt, to keep going. And that in itself is a form of teleology. It's like they have a goal.
That's a little trippy to think about.
It is trippy.
Yeah.
But it makes sense when you think about all the incredible things that living things do.
Right, like we're not just...
to survive and reproduce.
Yeah, we're not just like static beings. We're
constantly changing.
We're constantly trying to maintain that
balance.
That balance, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's self-organization and autopoiesis. But how does this all tie back to natural selection?
Right, because
we can't just ignore...
Darwin's still in the room.
Yep, Darwin's still in the room.
Exactly.
Like, he showed us that.
Yeah.
It's all about random variation and survival of the fittest.
Yeah, so how do we reconcile these ideas?
Right.
Well, there are a couple of ways to bridge that gap
between
natural selection and teleology.
Okay.
Some approaches, what we can call indirect.
Okay.
They suggest that, these selection pressures are kind of like the hidden hand shaping the organization that we see.
Okay.
So even if a trait doesn't have a specific function right now, it might be a leftover from past selection.
Okay.
That's still contributing to the overall stability and flexibility of the organism.
So it's like carrying the echoes of its evolutionary history.
Exactly. Like imagine you've got this old toolbox, right? And it's full of tools that, maybe you don't use every day, but they're there just in case.
Right. You might need them someday.
Exactly. And it's the same with these traits. traits, they might not have a thin function now, but they're part of this historical legacy.
Right, like a biological baggage.
Biological baggage. I love that.
But then you have the other side of the coin, right?
Right. I have the direct natural selection accounts.
Okay, tell me about those.
Oh, these folks are saying, nope. Selection is directly responsible for the existence of functional traits.
Okay.
They're explicitly using selection to explain why things have purposes.
Okay, but that's where I get a little lost.
Yeah. Because it still feels like we're
adding purpose to a process that's supposed to be blind and aimless.
Yeah, I get that. That's a common stumbling block.
Yeah.
So let me try to unpack it a bit.
Okay, please.
So one type of direct approach is called teleological.
Okay.
And it basically says that a trait's function is determined by its past history of selection.
Okay.
So, for instance, a bird's beak has the function of cracking seeds.
Yeah.
Because that's what it was selected for over generations.
Right, so it's like a record of past success.
That worked, stayed.
Yeah, what worked, stayed.
And its purpose is rooted in that evolutionary story.
Okay, I'm following so far.
But then we have another type of direct approach, the dispositional view.
Okay.
And this one's a bit more flexible.
Okay.
It focuses on the trait's present or future contribution to fitness.
So it's less about where it came from.
Exactly.
And more about what it's doing.
Right now.
Yeah.
So even if a trait didn't originally evolve for a specific purpose, if it helps the organism survive and reproduce now, we can say it has that function in the present.
So it's all about what's happening
in the here and now.
In the here and now.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got these two different direct approaches.
Yeah.
But they both have their problems, right?
Oh, of course. Nothing's perfect.
Yeah.
So the ideological folks, they really struggle with traits that acquire new functions.
Okay.
Like, what happens if, wings originally evolved for regulating temperature and only later became useful for flight?
Right. Like
how do you account for that?
If you're just looking at the past,
exactly,
you're going to miss some of these dynamic changes.
You're missing a big part of the picture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the disposable view has its problems too, right?
It does.
Because
big critique.
It feels a little circular.
It does. It feels a bit circular.
Yeah.
Because if we say a trait has a function because it contributes to fitness, and then we define fitness as the ability to survive and reproduce.
Right.
Aren't we just saying a trait is functional because it's, functional?
Yeah, we're not really explaining anything.
We're just kind of defining it in terms of itself.
Right.
And then on top of that, you have things like exaptation.
Oh, yeah. That's where things get really interesting.
Right, where you have a trait that evolved for one thing, gets repurposed for something totally different.
Like feathers, right.
Feathers are a classic example.
Yeah, weren't they originally from?
Insulation.
Insulation, yeah.
And then later on, they became useful for display.
Yeah.
And then eventually, flight.
So even if we could nail down
that original function. Evolution's not done with it.
Right, like it can...
It's constantly tinkering.
Yeah, it's like evolution is this...
mad scientist in the lab.
Yeah, just constantly like...
throwing things together. Seeing what works.
Yeah.
So it's messy.
It's messy.
It's beautiful.
It's beautiful, yeah.
But it definitely makes it hard to come up with these neat and tidy definitions.
Right, so with all this messiness and all these different approaches, is there even any hope?
Yeah.
For a unified theory of teleology and biology?
That is the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And that's what we're going to be tackling next.
Okay, so stay tuned. Okay, so we've been wrestling with this idea of teleology and biology.
We have. It's a tricky one.
And I think it's time to circle back to those 5 big concerns that we laid out at the beginning.
Oh, yeah, the big 5.
The big 5, right. Vitalism, backwards causation, clashing with mechanistic explanations, mentalism, and whether any of this is even testable.
Right. Those are some pretty serious
hurdles, yeah.
For anyone trying to talk about purpose and nature without sounding like
you're invoking magic.
Exactly, or some divine plan.
So have we managed to clear those hurdles? Like, have the modern approaches actually addressed those concerns?
I think we've made good progress.
Okay, good.
Like, by grounding teleology in natural selection and focusing on these self-organizing properties of life, we've pretty much kicked vitalism to the curb.
Okay, so no more mimical life force.
I think we can safely say that.
That's a relief.
Yeah.
What about backwards causation?
Yes, the time travel problem.
Right, because it still feels weird to say that a future outcome, like an eye seeing, is the reason an eye exists.
Yeah, it's like saying the effect causes the cause.
Exactly.
Which, goes against everything we know about...
About how time works.
Yeah, about how the universe works.
So how do we get around that?
Well, it's important to remember that these modern accounts aren't saying that the future literally causes the past.
Okay.
What they're saying is that the selection pressures of the past have shaped traits that are disposed to produce certain outcomes in the present.
So it's more about recognizing the historical trajectory.
Exactly. It's about understanding the long chain of events that led to a trait's current function.
So it's not time travel, it's more like
Evolutionary history.
evolutionary history, yeah.
Casting a long shadow.
Does that also help with the worry about teleology clashing with mechanistic explanations?
It does, because we can totally explain the mechanisms of an eye, the optics, the nerves, all that stuff in purely physical terms, even while acknowledging that its function
is tied to its evolutionary history.
It's like appreciating the intricate workings of a clock while also understanding it was built to tell time.
So we can have our mechanistic case.
And eat our teleological frosting, too.
I like that. I like that.
We don't have to choose one or the other.
Okay, so we've dealt with vitalism, we've dealt with backwards causation, we've dealt with mechanism. What about mentalism?
Are we still implying there's some kind of mind, capital M, behind nature's purpose?
Right, because we don't want to go back to
no cosmic puppet masters.
No cosmic puppet masters.
And I think modern accounts are very careful to avoid any hint of that.
Okay, good.
They explain teleology in terms of blind mechanistic processes.
Right, like natural selection.
Exactly. Natural selection, self-organization.
Okay.
It's all about the interplay of physical laws and historical contingencies, no guiding hand required.
Okay, that makes me feel a lot better, but what about the testability problem?
Ah, yes, the ultimate test.
Can we actually test whether something has a purpose?
Right, because we don't want to just be telling stories.
Right, it has to be more than just a good story.
We need evidence.
Yeah.
And that's where I think the modern approaches have really shined.
Okay.
Because we can test hypotheses about function by manipulating traits. Experimentally.
So like actually doing experiments.
Exactly. Like, what happens if we tweak this feature?
Yeah.
Does it affect the organism's survival or reproduction?
Okay, so we're actually like
getting our hands dirty.
Yeah, getting our hands dirty and seeing what happens.
And we can also look across different species, you know.
Okay.
How have similar traits evolved in different lineages?
Right, so we're comparing.
Comparing, exactly. These comparative methods help us to infer function based on patterns of correlation and divergence.
So it's not just like a philosophical thought experiment anymore.
It's real science.
It's real science. We can actually
get data,
get evidence.
It's exciting.
Yeah, that is exciting.
It's a really cool field to be working in.
So where does this all leave us then? Like, what's the big takeaway message for our listeners?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that teleology in biology is messy.
Okay.
It's complex. It's multifaceted.
Right.
There's no single answer that's going to satisfy everyone.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of debate still.
Oh, absolutely. The debates are going to continue. But that's what makes it so fascinating, right?
Right.
It forces us to wrestle with some of these really deep questions about life, about evolution.
About purpose.
About our place in the universe.
Right, if there even is one.
Exactly.
Well, I think that's a great place to wrap up this deep dive.
I think so.
Thank you so much for joining me.
This is fun.
This is a lot of fun, yeah, and for taking us through this really complex topic.
Anytime.
And for all of you listening out there, thank you for joining us on this exploration of teleology.
Yes, thank you.
Hopefully it's given you a new appreciation for this very subtle interplay of purpose and mechanism in the living world.
I hope so.
And until next time, keep asking questions, stay curious, and keep diving deep.